Good evening. I am Melinda Stubbs. I'd like to say good evening to President Ragland, members of the board, and Dr. Smith. And I want to introduce part of our team in Office of Academic Affairs who are going to be presenting for you this evening about foundational reading skills and some of the work that we've been doing this year in planning for next year. Bethany Goth, formerly Bethany Lynch, is our director of kindergarten through third grade, and she's going to be explaining some of the rationale and some of the work we've been doing in early literacy. And then Wendy Wells, our director of curriculum, is going to talk a little bit about the new legislation regarding dyslexia and how we're planning for that as well. So Bethany.
President Ragland, members of the board, Dr. Smith, thanks for having us tonight. Sorry for the quick name change there. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about foundational reading skills and what we're doing that with in our district, and also the process the brain follows as it's reading and the impact that has on our work. So if you look at this slide, we've learned a lot about the brain over the last few years, and especially this year, what impact that has on our brain as we're reading. While we know some of the processes that we learn as we grow, like learning how to speak, are natural processes that develop, we've learned that reading is not one of those natural processes. The brain has to create pathways in order for students to be able to read and adults to be able to read as well. So advances in technology have allowed us to see the process that the brain goes through as it's reading, which has in turn allowed us to see how that impacts our instruction and what we're doing for students. The main things that we have learned is that the brain uses 4 areas as it's reading, rather than one specific part of the brain. That helps us understand. We have to make sure that phonics skills are a priority for our students, especially in grades kindergarten through second. And when we're teaching those skills, we need to make sure that we strengthen these 4 areas of the brain by focusing on teaching sounds, letters, and meanings of words. We do have some data that was shared with us by the Education Advisory Board, and I'll just go through those with you. First of all, we know that 22% of students, and these are national studies, typically go unidentified with reading difficulties that they have. 55% of students who are advanced in third grade will drop to a basic level by 5th grade. In 95% of primary classrooms across the United States, insufficient time is spent on reading foundation skills or that phonics instruction piece. We also know that 60% of teachers haven't been trained on the science of reading or those foundational reading pieces. And then only 23% of graduate elementary education programs will teach the science of reading. In the last few years, we've adopted more rigorous standards, not just in Indiana, but really across the nation. And we've had a really large focus on comprehension, but less on those basic reading skills that students need to be able to read. And amongst these pieces of data, what really stands out to us would be that most classrooms don't spend sufficient time on foundations, and students are experiencing a drop in performance from third grade as they move forward. And again, looking at education programs, very few of those programs prepare teachers with training on that science behind reading. Okay. But we do have great news, and that is that virtually 95% of students have the cognitive capacity to be able to read. And again, that's fantastic news for everyone, really. What research shows us is that 80% of students, if they have high quality instruction in the classroom, will be able to read. And of those 80%, 30% of those students will be able to read regardless of the quality of instruction they have in their classrooms. We do have another 15% of students who need some additional support and time as they're learning those skills. And then if you're counting up like I was when I first heard this, we do have another 5% of students who may have some severe cognitive impairments that make reading more of a struggle to master. So taking that data, we kind of compared it with what we see in EVSC and where our students are right now. To the left, you can see our students who are getting reading interventions. So that would be our 15% of students who need those additional supports. What we see is we reflect almost at 15% in kindergarten, But then as our students move into first and second grade, while we're providing these interventions and those supports for them, we're continuing to see more and more students who need additional supports. Again, this does support that national finding that many students lack those basic skills in foundational reading, that they do need to decode more complex texts as they get older. And what we do know is this begins right away in kindergarten. So the very first day they're in there receiving those daily lessons from their teachers is when we begin this work. So with that in mind, we met with a focus group of teachers. We met with teachers who were in kindergarten through second grade. We invited them to attend, so it was completely voluntary. And just wanted to know, what do you see in our buildings? What do you think those needs are for reading instruction? They had a few things that they highlighted. One of the first things they said is, in our classrooms, we need to make sure we have some type of systematic scope and sequence for our content to make sure we're focusing on the same skills, that we're not missing anything, there aren't any gaps in the instruction we give our students. They also requested additional materials that could support the lessons that they're teaching in their classrooms. They also reflected the research that we received from the Education Advisory Board, in that most of them said they haven't had any formal training around phonics instruction, particularly as it relates to that science of reading. So based on that research, our own data, and the focus group feedback, we've taken a few steps to address those concerns and wanted to share those with you tonight. When we've reviewed the data, one thing that stands out is that this work is going to be beneficial for all students, not just those students who are struggling to read. So our plan to build a solid foundation for our youngest learners will then in turn create opportunities for them in the future as they continue to learn. So in order to provide our teachers with that training on the science of reading, we've partnered with Voyager to provide LETRS training. This is the contract that you recently approved. This training isn't a program, it's rather an investment in our teachers. And it'll provide information on the science of reading. So we're going to start with kindergarten this year and go through these 4 recommended core requirements. We're going to start with the challenge of learning how to read, then start to look at the sounds in the English language. And then in our next 2 modules, we'll teach beginning and advanced decoding, word recognition skills, and spelling skills as well. Prior to requesting your approval, we did speak with several districts who have used this training with their teachers and their staff. Each district that we talked to had significant increases, not just in their student performance, which you can see on the left, but also with their teacher knowledge. One thing that we continued to hear from everybody that we spoke to was this comment on the left, which is, I love that they have this up here. They said, why didn't we learn this earlier? And even as we spoke to the leaders, they said that just continued to echo from the teachers that they spoke to after they took this training. This is our long-range plan. So this is how we see ourselves making sure we get this to our kindergarten, first, and our second grade teachers. We begin this year with kindergarten teachers, and then in the 2 years following this, we'll look at first grade teachers, and then we'll bring second grade teachers in the year 2021. We've also purchased seats so that we can train our coaches and supporting teachers as well each year. And some of those teachers that would support this might be some special education teachers that we have, teachers who are working with students who are learning English as a new language, and then our building coaches and our academic coaches that support our teachers are going to learn this as well. We've also made sure that we have training for our principals and our leaders who are going into that classroom, so they'll receive that same information and also learn what this really would look like in a classroom. So if that leader is going into a classroom, what should they see students doing in that classroom? We have this set to roll out over the first semester of the school year. We have 1 module each month so that teachers can have some time to implement that new learning in their classroom. And during that second semester, we can also support the learning that's taking place through classroom visits, looking and analyzing our data, and getting teacher feedback as well. And then we also heard our teachers say that they needed materials to support this, so we're providing materials for our teachers as well. Recently, we met with a work group of kindergarten through second grade teachers who met to modify and share some resources that we received from a highly rated free access open source, and that's called EL Education. So within this next year, our teachers will have lesson plans in kindergarten and first grade that they can access. Within those materials that teachers requested, we've also provided decodable text, which are easy readers where children can practice those phonics skills that they're learning. And we appreciate your approval of those resources for this next year. The lessons shared by that work group will also have suggestions for small group instruction, and that would be for students who are struggling, who needed some extra help with that skill, but also for students who are doing really well and maybe need a challenge in some sort of activity to push them to that next level. We'll also have formative checks, which would just be assessments and checklists that teachers can use to check for student progress. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And
Can I
good.
ask, excuse me,
Oh, sorry.
can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Are we saying that our colleges and universities are not teaching reading teachers the skills necessary to have the foundation to come in and teach our kids right off the bat?
Yes.
Yes, and I.
Okay, so with that in mind, that means we're now having to take a program and teach our reading teachers how to teach reading.
Correct. And we do actually have representatives from University of Evansville and University of Southern Indiana who are going to come and attend this training with our teachers as well.
It just seems kind of backwards to me. And I just, you still have to be certified in reading to be a reading teacher, right? They're not just taking language arts people and making them reading teachers,
Correct.
right?
They have to be certified.
Okay. But we have to do the certification. The colleges and universities are not getting the job done across the board.
It's not part of the mandatory curriculum in the higher education.
It's just part of the area study of education.
And that's not just a phenomenon locally throughout the nation.
Yeah.
I think it's 53% of the universities teach some aspect of the science of reading, but not all 5 areas. So
It just seems like as a basic core class, probably one of the most important ones, it just doesn't make sense to me. So,
I
thank you.
would agree.
Okay. President Ragland, members of the board, and Dr. Smith, I'm going to share a little bit about the dyslexia legislation and some of those changes that have come through. If it seems like I'm blurring the lines between what Mrs. Goff shared and this next piece, that's really okay because it pairs together so nicely. Dr. Louisa Moats is the author of LETRS, and she's actually the vice president of the National Dyslexic Association. So a lot of the work that she does that's intended for all students is going to be really great for students who struggle and those with dyslexia. So having said that, we are so excited that our kindergarten teachers this year will be trained to teach the foundations of reading for students using that science. This will help teachers to identify and take action in the moment when they're teaching and not have to wait until later. But we also have to look at what steps that we have to take if students continue to struggle and if they have some signs of dyslexia. Okay, so first of all, there are requirements that came from the state. The first one is that we need to train a reading specialist, and there were IDOE approved programs. So we're sending 3 individuals this month, Mrs. Goff is one of those, to become the reading specialist. The other thing is we have to screen all students in kindergarten, again in first and in second grade, for signs of reading problems or dyslexia. We hosted the group to come in of kindergarten through first grade teachers, and they looked at different screening options that the state provided. Mrs. Goff actually worked with the state to help get one of the screeners approved, which we really thought was exciting because it's the ones that the teachers chose that they thought that was the best, and it actually fits into our curriculum. So when the teachers are teaching using these LETRS techniques, they'll be able to give one of these screeners to see if the students were able to do what they needed to do, or if they're at risk for some reading problems. So it fits really nicely into our curriculum instead of being another thing that we have to do. We also have worked to establish some risk parameters. So what does it look like at a particular age to be at risk for reading problems? And that changes as the students age from kindergarten through second. LETRS does a nice job of explaining that as well. And then if students do have these tendencies, we are not diagnosing students just from these screeners, but if they do have these tendencies to be at risk for reading problems or signs of characteristics of dyslexia, then we need to provide them with an intervention that matches. The one that we've chosen is the Orton-Gillingham approach, and the M.A. Rooney Foundation has provided lessons for every single day that are very intensive and match up with what we're doing with the LETRS training. Some of the same authors have worked on both, so it's a really good fit, we believe. So that is, we will have teachers that will be trained in that. And then we will work on how to report the student's risk to the state, and also to let parents know that we're seeing some issues on the screeners and that we're going to be providing some additional interventions for their child. So some next steps that we have as we implement the plan, we want to continue to have opportunities to share information, to collect input, answer questions and concerns. In addition to LETRS training, we know that we need to train our teachers on how to do the Orton-Gillingham intervention pieces. We also wish to create a website so that if parents are concerned or have questions, they can come to EVSC and get answers and get support and get follow-up. So those are some of the things that we want to do to make sure that we support our community. We know that you probably have questions, and honestly, that's a good thing because we still have questions too. And if you ask questions, that may help get us on the right track of more things that we need to research and find out. So that's all we have at this time, but we'll certainly take your questions.
Who all was invited to come? You said you sent out an invitation to the reading
To
teachers.
which piece?
You said you invited, I guess, the initial to come give their input on.
Yeah, do you want to speak on that?
Focus
Yeah.
For the first focus group, we invited kindergarten through second grade teachers, and that was when we were looking at classroom instruction and getting their feedback on that. For the second group, we had some.
Dyslexia group was the second group.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
How many came to the first group?
We had roughly 10.
Out of a possible, how many? Can the math lady help?
150.
Maybe 150?
Yeah.
That's disappointing.
For the dyslexia group, we actually invited special education teachers. We had a speech and language pathologist who was there as well as our kindergarten through third grade teachers.
Thanks.
No, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, that's wonderful.